Joe Biden is losing ground. Coney Barrett has claimed the ground, and the Electoral College is what can preserve the ground. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is the Glorious Rescue. Another Tuesday, which means another episode of the Glorious Rescue. So we're going to jump into this very first episode with not really any preliminaries. I do not want to bore us with all of those. I know I tend to go a little bit lengthy on those as we begin the episode to just give many minutes, maybe not many minutes, but at least a minute or two of preliminaries. So I want to jump right in with the first story and get into those a little bit later. First things first, we're going to talk about Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the election as it comes closer. We are just a few days out now. So make sure to drop off your vote, turn in your vote, vote in person. However you are going to do it, make sure to have a plan, stick to the plan. It is our duty to do so, and also our privilege. We have the privilege of being able to elect our officials in our government to represent us. So make sure you do so. I did mine yesterday. So first things first, we're going to talk about the election. Then we're going to get into a little bit about the agenda of the left moving forward, what they want to see, what is their envisionment, their picture of America 5, 10, 50, 100 years from now. And then also talk about Coney Barrett, exciting news there. And then our end of show segment, I want to make sure we have ample time for that. So first things first. Yes, you heard me right. Joe Biden is losing ground. Now, this is not a surprise, or it is at least not a surprise to me, because if you remember back in 2016, Hillary Clinton had a vast lead over Donald Trump. And as the election came closer, it seemed like the lead started to wane. And in fact, Joe Biden now has a lower and smaller lead on Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton did back in 2016. So polls in presidential elections normally have very little bearing, at least we have seen over the last several elections. I would say that this is case in point is going to be another example of that same situation. But nevertheless, Joe Biden's lead in all of these swing states are coming to a close, where he's not really leading at all in any of the swing states, any of the important battleground states. And that is probably because one of the most important and key issues that was focused in on in the presidential debate. If you remember, I said Trump didn't do so well in the very first one. He did quite poorly, actually. And in the second one, I said that I think he did much better convincing people that were declined states, those in the middle. And I think that the polling data reflects that. One of the main issues that Joe Biden found himself in was in regards to fossil fuels. He talked about how he wanted to phase out the entire oil industry in America. And then when Trump pinpointed him, he fell apart. And there was one point when he asked Donald Trump to produce video evidence of him wanting to ban fracking and all of these different items. And so Donald Trump did just that. Within minutes, his campaign had created a video, posted on Twitter, of Joe Biden saying all those things to which he was denying in that exact debate. Not only that, but basically saying that you want to phase out the entire oil industry to a lot of Americans as they're watching this debate is not a very good campaign strategy. Nevertheless, that's what he went with. And now, after these debates, he's gone silent, gone quiet, and his campaign is not on the move for the past several days, and it won't be up until the election. So right now they're kind of doing a little bit of quote unquote damage control, as a lot of reports are coming out and saying, and trying to, representatives of his campaign trying to re-message that, rebrand it, and try to clarify what Joe Biden meant with what he said. But we know what he said. We know what he meant. He accidentally slipped and let out that wildly radical left agenda that he is trying to hide, right? And we're going to talk about this later in the episode. He has a very, very left, radical left ideology and policy, and he surrounds himself with people like that. And then he tries to deny that and pitch himself as that center of the road candidate to declined states and all Americans, really. So we talked about that. We talked about Trump starting to grill him about banning fracking, and then Joe Biden saying that he was in favor of fracking, that he was okay with it. That's just a technique used in the oil industry and fossil fuels and whatnot. And then Trump produced the video of him saying the exact opposite. So that has really hurt Biden. I think that specifically is one of a couple of different instances that has hurt him as the election comes closer. The statistic that I referenced earlier about Hillary Clinton having a larger lead on Donald Trump back in 2016 than Joe Biden even has right now is this. With 14 days to go before the election, 2 weeks out from the election, Hillary Clinton had a 4.4% lead in certain swing states over Donald Trump. On average, 4.4% lead 2 weeks until the election. 2 weeks up until the election, this 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden only had an average lead of 3.9%. So you could say Joe Biden still has a lead. Well, Hillary Clinton did so as well, and we know how that turned out for her, campaigning only in the populated areas and not really worrying about the swing states, not really worrying about the electoral vote, which we will get into for our end of show segment. So, how did he show his true colors? Well, here is another example. Not only did he really accidentally let his leftist agenda, his wild radical agenda slip in regards to the oil industry, but he did so when he made this statement. He said, quote, "This is the most consequential election in history," is what he's referring to. Not because I'm running, but because who I'm running against. This is the most consequential election in a long, long, long time. This is the platform of Joe Biden. Biden's policy, his platform, his entire strategy is not about who he is, what his policy is, what platforms he's running on, but it is simply an anti-Trump policy. He's saying, I am not anything special. I'm not this consequential and important candidate. I'm not the person who will save America. I'm not the person with the policies that, if enacted, will save our country. He's just saying that this man's bad, so you have to vote for me. That's his entire platform. People are starting to see that, especially so with Kamala Harris. A recent interview that we're going to roll a brief tape on is Kamala Harris had a 60-minute interview. She, again, didn't do so well. So when this reporter came to her and said, "You are very different in the policies that you've supported in the past," quote, "You're considered the most liberal United States senator." She said this to Kamala Harris in this interview. Let's roll the tape really quickly.
You're very different in the policies that you've supported in the past. You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage. But
yeah, well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator. You supported the Green New Deal. You supported Medicare for all.
Okay, let's just sit back and have a nice little laugh. I can't tell what is more fake, her as a person, her policies, or her laugh. You can just see it dripping off of her, right? The laugh, it's all fake. This is because we know, we've talked about this before, specifically with her, she is a very manipulative person. She has a long history of misusing personal relationships and people abusing those relationships, misusing them, manipulating them to gain advantage in her public career. She has abused those relationships, manipulated people in situations, and there's a long history of this throughout San Francisco, the Bay Area, her tenure in California, and now as a senator, where she has manipulated people and situations to promote and further her own public service. Huge example of this, Joe Biden, the election. In the primaries, she called Joe Biden basically awful things, like a racist and bigoted, all these different things. And then when asked about it later because she joined as his VP pick, she said, "It was a debate. It was a debate." Sorry, I know my impersonations are getting quite rough. Many of you have already been commenting, mentioning that, but I'm still going to try. I'm going to get a little bit better here. But that is who she is. She manipulates those situations for her betterment. And then when cornered on it, she does this really awkward. I didn't even give you the longest clip, but if you go longer throughout that video, there's a really awkward moment where she just sits there and stares like, "You got me." But here's what she said. When the reporter asked her, "Joe Biden says one thing and you have a long history of another. So where are you at?" She says, "I would not have joined the ticket if I didn't support what Joe was proposing." I'm sorry, Kamala Harris, but you have a long history of not supporting what Joe Biden proposes. When Joe Biden says he wants to have a public option for the Affordable Care Act, you say you want government mandated health care and nationalized health care. You support the Green New Deal and say you're in favor of banning fracking, while Joe Biden, yes, he says the same thing, but he also tries to skirt around it and says he wants to phase it out, or sometimes saying that he wants to keep the oil industry. So he says things back and forth. You have a long history of disagreeing with him. You also have a long history of manipulating people to, not because you agree with them or because you have a deep moral regard to public service and to serve our country, but actually you have a long public history of using people, manipulating situations to further your career. So that is probably what this is. She probably hasn't joined the ticket because she supports what Joe's proposing. Probably she has joined the ticket because she wants to be a vice president of the United States. Nevertheless, she is going to be that person to push Joe Biden to the left, further and further to the left. AOC said the exact same thing. She said if they can get a Democratic White House, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, that they will be able to push the radical left agenda without the bipartisanship that is the corruption of the Republican Party. Actually, the bipartisanship is an act of public discussion. Yes, the founders didn't necessarily support partisanship, didn't support the idea of party politics, that idea, and different separate parties. But what they did understand is that people differed on different views, and that the legislator was meant to have those differing views, to engage in free discussion, to be able to discuss what are the pros, what are the cons, what is the best public policy for the people. And those in the House were supposed to be the representatives of the people, while the senators were the representatives of the state. And in the legislature, there's more dialogue, discussion, deliberation to come to a better agreement of what the law should be. AOC completely throwing that out, showing her true colors again. She is not knowledgeable in politics at all. She doesn't understand that that is what the purpose of the legislator is. We want the legislator to be inactive. We want it to be basically useless. That means they're writing less laws. That means less government, less intervention in our lives. But AOC says we're trying to elect all these Democrats so that we can basically get rid of Republicans and we can just cram our agenda down the American people's throats. That is what AOC is going for. She's showing her true colors. Kamala Harris is, Joe Biden. We all know it. And yet they haven't come out to admit it, that they want to have a radical left administration. The end road, really the destruction of our American society, culture, principles, our beautiful and beloved nation, the nation that we hold so dear, and the liberties that have been passed on to us that we desire to pass on to our children's children, those freedoms that we enjoy so much. Those are what are at stake here in this election. So again, I encourage you to vote. And the very, very last item I want to discuss before our end of show segment is this. Amy Coney Barrett has been confirmed as the next justice of the Supreme Court, an associate justice on the Supreme Court. This is very exciting for those of you who are constitutionalists, originalists, strict constructionists, I should say. This is not necessarily a win for quote-unquote conservatives. It's not a loss for quote-unquote liberals. We've talked about this before on the show. The tool, the aim of the court is not to be a tool wielded by the right or the left to push their own agenda. It is supposed to be apolitical, against party, outside of party. And it is not supposed to be in regards to conservative and liberal, but rather those who adhere to a strict constructionist view and a loose constructionist view. Where they differ is not conservative and liberal, but how they interpret the Constitution and how they believe the Constitution should be interpreted into our laws. That is the difference. Amy Coney Barrett is a strict constructionist, one who vehemently opposes the idea of the Constitution being a living document, that we can take the laws and we can take the Constitution, we can just mold it and fit it into whatever law, whatever narrative we want to push. She's vehemently opposed to that. She's a literalist, a strict constructionist, a constitutionalist, and that the laws in our land should be constitutional. This is a win for those of us who believe in the Constitution, who want to see the Constitution promulgated, because we believe that it will preserve our liberties. That is a win for all of us. Those of you who disagree with that, it's a loss for you. And on top of that, I just want you to remember that it was the Democratic Party who opposed a woman being confirmed to the Supreme Court. Same with Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas was the one who swore her in under oath on the Bible, and he was also opposed by the Democrats because he was a conservative, an originalist, a constructionist. It wasn't the fact that he was black, it couldn't salvage him. We often think that the Democrats are the party of minority groups. Well, in fact, they vehemently opposed Clarence Thomas. They were the ones who were anti-ethnic, anti-minority group, I guess. They're also the one who are anti-woman because they do not support a woman. They do not support Clarence Thomas, this African American, being appointed to the Supreme Court because, again, it's not about the identity politics that they try to put up on a facade. It's about what they believe about the Supreme Court. They believe it's a tool to promote their own agenda. And so, because these candidates, these justices, do not fit their narrative, do not fit their agenda, they don't like them, regardless of whatever group they fall into. Now that we have discussed losing ground, Joe Biden losing ground, now that we have discussed Amy Coney Barrett claiming her ground, being confirmed as the next Supreme Court justice. We want to talk about preserving the ground. These are the end of show segments that we didn't get into in our last episode, but that we have done for the past 40 episodes or so, where we take the last little bit of the show to delve into deeper discussions that are in regards to the principles that we hold so dear, the principles that our nation was founded upon, and the principles that will preserve our freedoms. This end of show segment will discuss the Electoral College. We have done so a little bit in previous episodes, but this is going to be a nice general overview, a good also reminder to those of you who do understand it a little bit more, but also a plea of why the Electoral College is beneficial, especially in these times as the election is just a few days away. So stay tuned and welcome to the very first segment of the founding era. Did you know that one could say that all Californian Republican votes have had absolutely no value in presidential elections since Ronald Reagan was elected as the President of the United States? This is because of the Electoral College. Now, you hear that. You almost want to pull directly away from that and say, well, if all those votes are meaningless, or if you're on the other side, you could say a Republican state like Texas, and you could say those Democrat votes haven't mattered in however long since a Democrat was elected, or all the electoral votes went to a Democrat during that election. And you would almost want to shy away from that, or immediately pull back from that and say, well, then why do we have this system if those votes are meaningless? So we're going to talk about that. There's a huge move to defund and defend the Electoral College. What do I mean by that? I mean it's a very pivotal, but also a very heated issue. There are many people who want to, quote unquote, defund it. They want to abolish it, get rid of it, and many that want to defend it. It's become more polarized of an issue, and that's because it is a very important issue. So if you see me referencing these things here, that is actually because this is a thesis, I guess you could say, that I've written before in defense of it, and I'm just going to reference it here as we continue on the show. We have many different reasons why it's beneficial, why it preserves our rights, but then also how it helps us grow as a whole, as a nation. So the Electoral College voting system should be kept and defended because it checks and balances the states and regions, consolidates political parties while extending the voice of minority groups, and defines America as a republic. So first of all, what does it mean when we say that it checks and balances the states and regions? Well, for instance, it balances the powers between large and small states. Here's an example. There's a smaller state, for instance, like Wyoming. It can have 4 times the voting power in the electoral system than it would under the direct election system. That's really the two competing, a popular vote. The majority rule is 51%, or the Electoral College. Well, you have small states that people don't really want to, candidates don't want to go through and campaign in. Those states are now pivotal, like battleground states, because of the way the Electoral College is set up. So not only do you have to have support in various states, but you also have to have trans-regional support, because one candidate can't just be elected by the West Coast. Whereas now, if you basically win California under a popular vote, you have very close to what you need. Let's say you win California and Texas. Well, there you go. Now you win. Or you could mention something on the East Coast or the South or the Midwest. You could say you could win one region under the popular vote, gain enough votes with certain amounts of voter turnout, and win by just winning one region. But with the Electoral College, there's not enough electoral votes within one to be able to elect the president or elect the candidate to president. So that means he has to have support from multiple different regions. He has to have trans-regional support, and he has to have trans-state support. That provides a more unified and also a more unilateral campaign, where people are campaigning all across the United States, all across different regions, to be a more well-balanced candidate. So that's first of all, it balances states, checks and balances states, checks and balances regions. Not only that, but it consolidates political parties and it extends the voice of minority groups. This is what is most important, because when the left touts the idea of a popular vote, they really are pushing down minorities, and the left touts themselves and prides themselves in being the party of the minority groups. So how does it do so? Consolidates political parties. The Electoral College consolidates the myriad of American opinions into 2 political parties, because third parties don't get enough electoral votes. They don't get the forceful steam from the electorate. So they die out. That's why you don't see, yes, you may see multiple people from third parties on the ballot. That's more popular in California, but they're more likely to fizzle out. So that is actually beneficial to the country because, for instance, during the French Revolution and the collapse of the French government, one of the determining factors of that was so many political parties. It caused a lot of civil unrest. So the Electoral College allows really the support to be split into two different parties, which is actually, it may not seem like it right now with such polarizing climate and political climate, but it is more beneficial to the unity of our country. So it consolidates those political parties, but also extends the vote and the voice of minority groups. Here's what I mean by that. If you are a minority group or a member of a minority group, you will not be able to elect the president because just that, you are a minority group. So this is hypothetical, but if you had a minority group, that obviously means they are a smaller population, so they don't have enough support in the popular vote to elect the president wholly or the candidate wholly within their ethnic group. But with enough electoral votes in certain swing states, they can sway the election for their candidates. So actually, under the Electoral College, not only does it help balance states, regions, political parties, but it also helps minority groups. Very hidden benefit of the Electoral College. So remember that the next time a Democrat says to you they're in support of abolishing the Electoral College. And lastly, it should be kept, it should be defended because it defines America as a republic. This is the deeper principle that I wanted to discuss here. Our nation is a constitutional republic. One of the reasons why we declared independence from the British Crown was because they altered fundamentally the forms of our government that is listed in the Declaration of Independence. One of our appeals to the Crown of why we declared our independence was because they fundamentally altered the forms of our government, and this would fundamentally alter our forms of government. It also says in that same declaration that one of the reasons was because he has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people like the Electoral College, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. The idea that the power within the consent of the governed only threatens tyrants. Tyrants are the only ones worried about power in the hands of the governed. I wonder why. I wonder why that means that there are so many members of government all across the nation right now that are so worried about grabbing control from us, the governed. Maybe it's because they are tyrants. The war for independence was fought for these reasons, because they were fundamentally altering the forms of our government. As this pivot in the railroad tracks comes to the American people, it must be decided, should traditional representative government stay by keeping this college, or should the progressive voice of democracy prevail? Many scream that this system twists the votes of many Americans, but what is more important, a vote or a voice? In representative government, millions of Americans' voices are channeled through a couple hundred legislators. This means that their voices echo throughout the nation. Although democracy, a popular vote, may possibly, just possibly fix a few votes in certain areas in certain specific elections, it diminishes the average American voice. The Electoral College should remain in American society because it checks and balances the states and regions, consolidates political parties while extending the voice of minority groups, and defines America as a republic. That is the general summary I have to you, an appeal to defend the Electoral College, something that really should be held dear to all of us because it preserves the liberties, the rights, the freedoms that we hold so dear in our nation. That is what I want to pass on to you, to help you remember that when this comes up again, possibly after the 2020 election. The defense of the Electoral College. Before we go, I just want to say a brief thank you. Thank you for the growth, the support. It is always appreciated. We were able to see a good number of growth in this YouTube channel while also retaining really basically the exact same number of listens on the audio platform. So it is an indicator of strong growth, for which I appreciate and thank all of you. Make sure to let me know if you have any tips, suggestions, questions, anything like that. Make sure to tag the Glorious Rescue. If you put out any excerpts, any shoutouts or anything like that on social media. I also just want to say that we are very excited about a few things coming up, some additional intros, outros, YouTube landing page videos, things like that, good promotional content. So make sure to tune in. Make sure to continue to stay tuned in for our very next episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is the Glorious Rescue.